Hello, well, I'm Salvador Avalos, and this is a case marking of Korean positional phrases. First, before I begin and get into the actual Korean data, I'd like to talk a little bit about one of the tools I used to formulate most of my hypotheses in the presentation, and that is XBar Theory. So what is XBar Theory? Well, it is a way of representing the syntactic structure of a language in such a way that all phrases, or XP, are constructed according to the same principles, and in these principles, the phrases are projections of a head of syntactic category. That means your noun, or N, will project up to NP, or verb V will project up to VP. And while your lower level bars or substructures can move either to the right or left, it is generally understood that the underlying structure is the same across syntactic categories. And that's nice and all, but why use XBar theory? In this case, it captures the insight that all phrases share some essential structure and assumes that all languages share these same basic structures. And important for this presentation, it very clearly shows the relationship between phrases, and it clearly shows the headedness. Speaking of headedness, we have two XBar structure trees here. On the left, English, right, Korean. And in English, you can see the tense phrase, the noun phrase, and the verb phrase all are left branching headedness. And in Korean, you have the right branching headedness for the tense, noun, and verb phrase. If we look a little bit closer at the verb phrase, we have what is usually understood to be the object of a sentence right here is actually contained to the right of the verb, while as in Korean, you have it contained to the left. That gives you your subject, verb, object word order in English, so it's Salvador read the book, while in Korean, you have a subject, object, verb word order, so it's Jinsu book read, but it's still understood to be Jinsu read the book. Before beginning this project, I had absolutely no experience with Korean. I do not speak it, and I've never studied it before. This means I'm approaching it with a near objective viewpoint and relying only on the data to form my hypotheses. And in this data, I started seeing something a bit interesting. There were the same group of morphemes appearing after nouns. And after writing these morphemes down, I realized I can group them into two distinct categories. One where the morphemes follow objects, and one where the morphemes follow subjects. And after looking at that, I thought, could these be grammatical case markers? Now here are the potential subject markers that I saw. We have un, nun, ga, and i, and I've marked them in red here so you can see them in the data as I saw them. And here are the object markers. We have ul and rul, and as you can see, they follow the object, what's understood to be the object of the sentence. We have Bob ul and cha rule. If these are actually syntactic markers, how can we test for that? One thing we can do is we can look for scrambling in the Korean language. And scrambling is I guess a phenomenon that occurs in case-heavy languages where you can actually switch around the word orders and the sentence will mean the same thing. So in Korean, you found that you can actually switch the subject and object and it will still mean Jinsu eats rice. However, if you try to move the verb, it becomes ungrammatical. So in this way, in Korean, there is some evidence of scrambling, but it is limited. So that is possible evidence of case marking. Now that we have some type of evidence of case marking, how can we actually diagram this in a tree? So here we have our XBar tree again, and I've actually exploded the noun phrases into a case phrase. So we have green, Jinsu ga is a subject, and our object, Bob ul, and then the verb, mugsub nida. But does the case phrase actually fit inside of the Korean syntax? Well, is it right-headed? Yes. And do you get the correct word order when you actually read it out? What do you know? You do. And it's the correct word order. All right, case closed. Let's move on and look for something else. I'm sure all of you have run into an English positional phrase at some point in your life, such as this sentence, "The river is under the bridge." Now in English, positionals appear before the noun they modify, so you have under the bridge and before the noun. In this way, you can call them prepositions. This is actually not the case in Korean. They occur after the nouns they modify, and so they must be called postpositionals. These two postpositional phrases, alai and dwi, or under and behind, you can see them here in these sentences marked in red. Dali alai ai, with dali being bridge and alai being under. And then you have nai dwi ai, with me being behind and at. There's something else interesting going on with these sentences. Earlier, I've already said that Korean seems to like to mark its subjects and objects. However, in these sentences, the object marker is conspicuously absent. But wait, what's that? Right there. This morpheme ae has showed up in every single positional sentence that I looked at in the Korean data. Could this actual but the gloss here says this is a double postpositional word, but could this actually be a postpositional case marker? Things get even stranger when you look at these sentences here and where the morpheme is present, but there is no positional word at all, and yet both the gloss and translation say that these sentences are positional in nature. Now, I may not know Korean, however, I do know a bit of Japanese, and Japanese actually has a morpheme that functions in a similar way. You have the morpheme ni. And because both Japanese and Korean are right-headed, use postpositionals, and both of them exhibit some case marking, we can actually use XBar theory to compare the two languages and come up with a hypothesis for Korean. So here are the two Korean sentences next to their Japanese counterparts. And in the Japanese sentences, I noticed that when the positional word is absent, the morpheme takes on the guise of a positional. But when the positional word appears, the morpheme actually becomes a case marker, in this case, a locative case marker. So, using that, I can make the hypothesis that I actually is pulling double duty as a positional marker and a positional itself. Well, if it is actually a positional marker, can we scramble it? Here, we've already seen that the positional marker has appeared sentence initial and sentence non-final, so there's already evidence that it can move around within Korean. And as you can see here, you actually can switch it and it comes out as the same sentence, but just the emphasis is adjusted or moved around. Now, how can we actually diagram this? It would be easy to diagram a positional sentence in Korean that contains a positional. You just drop the noun into the noun phrase, the positional into the positional phrase, and the case marking into the case phrase. But how do you account for sentences like this, where there is no positional, but the sentence is still positional? For that, I came up with two hypotheses, and both of them involve case phrase. In the first hypothesis, I begins in the postpositional phrase and actually moves into the case phrase, and in doing so retains its positional value but takes on the power of a case phrase. This type of lateral movement from one syntactic category to another is fairly common across the world's languages, so this is a pretty good explanation of why I can do this, or I can pull two jobs pretty much. And the second hypothesis, I is only a case marker, but the postpositional phrase is actually null or defaults to at or to. This also is fairly common across world languages, and so this too is a good explanation of this phenomenon. Now, which one of these is correct? And for that, I don't know. But that is the really cool thing about the XBar theory is that it allows linguists to make all these different hypotheses, and then as they test or examine and collect more data, they can disprove or approve or modify their hypothesis. Any questions?
So why do you need a prepositional phrase at all, or a postpositional phrase at all? Why can't that just be a case phrase? Why are there two different things? Does it ever act like a postposition separate from being a case marker?
Separate from being a case marker. See, that is not actually something. That was actually not something I was able to see in the data, but I would actually like to know that myself.
Well, you have those examples, sorry, with two though, you know, with both.
There was the examples. There were some sentences where you had the positional words and the positional morpheme, but then you also had sentences where you just had the morpheme. So in that way, I guess,
Okay.
yeah. Questions?
Not the same competition, but it may be relevant that the other positionals you're talking about don't function in grammatical sentences without the A, the I.
It didn't seem.
Just say, ne tu Israel.
It didn't. I didn't see any data that would suggest that.
So the A can be by itself, but the other ones can't, don't work without A.
Yes.
Do you prefer movement or?
Which one do I prefer?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a tough question. I do actually kind of like the movement because when you draw it on an XBar tree, you get to draw the little arrows, and those are fun. Yes.
What data did you use?
The data I used were from these various references. So I went online and I looked for like Korean blogs or Korean or amateur Korean education sites where people just take it upon themselves, say, hey, I know Korean, I want to teach other people about Korean. And then I also used actual Korean grammar books. We have this one here, the Korean Grammar, Complete Guide to Speaking Korean Naturally. That one is actually where probably most of my data came from.
By our own Emily Curtis.
And I also used a couple of scholarly articles. We have this one here, the Sangpil Byon Andrew, the Modern Korean Grammar, A Practical Guide. And that one was pretty useful as well. But mostly, I just used the online articles, whatnot, to gather data, and then the two scholarly books to actually process the data and examine it.
Why did you choose Korean if you don't speak there?
I am actually really interested in East Asian languages. So Korean was one I actually wanted to take here at Western, but I found out sadly it's not offered. Anything else? Okay.